This student scored a 130 on the rhetorical analysis, not because they couldn't identify rhetorical choices, but because their analysis was formulaic. Today, I'll show you how to go from formulaic to truly effective rhetorical analysis and upgrade your score from a 130 to 141. Hey everyone, welcome to or welcome back to CT's AP Cookies. Over the past 7 years, I've helped hundreds of international students score a 5 on AP Lang. I've studied this test inside out so you don't have to. Today, we are analyzing the newest rhetorical analysis sample the College Board released for the 2025 exam. I'll show you exactly why it scored a 130 and more importantly, how to upgrade it to a 141. The difference often comes down to one thing: moving beyond formulaic analysis. This is a mistake I've seen again and again over the years, and it's what keeps students stuck at the 3 for evidence and commentary points. So if you've been getting 130 for rhetorical analysis, this is the video for you. This essay is analyzing the 2025 prompt, David Truer's passage about Native American reservations. Here's the introduction paragraph. If you've watched my videos before, you can probably guess what I'm going to say about this introduction. Yes, it earns the thesis point with the last sentence where the student presents the main argument of the passage and the rhetorical choices. However, the introduction is too long, and the student is not making good use of the precious 40 minutes. So I'd condense it to 2 sentences. Many members of American society have never met or interacted with a Native American before, even though Native Americans have left an unimaginable impact on America. In the introduction to his book, David Truer displays this importance of Native Americans in our history through historical examples, second-person pronoun, and similes. Remember, when you present the rhetorical choices, you don't need to elaborate on them. Writing a short but effective introduction can give you at least 1 more minute to work on your body paragraphs. Also, notice this passage is from a book introduction. Keep that in mind because it affects how we interpret the author's purpose. I'll come back to this point when I revise the 3rd body paragraph. Now, let's look at the first body paragraph. The student identifies historical details, war fought in part by Native Americans, the allies of the Revolutionary Army, and so on. That's good for the evidence point. But let's look at the commentary. The inclusion of these historical details provides specific details to the readers of his novel, which allows them to better understand and connect with his message of Native American importance. This is what I call circular analysis. It says historical details provide details. It doesn't actually explain how and why these examples advance Truer's arguments. The student is doing what many students do: label the device, say it helps the audience understand or connects with the message, and move on. This kind of formulaic analysis is basically just a waste of time. Now let's apply the 2 most important tips for improving your commentary. Tip number 1, specify the audience. Tip number 2, present the tension. Before we revise, let's establish what the author is actually trying to say. The author says in paragraph 5, most people will go a lifetime without ever knowing an Indian, which means the author assumes that Native Americans are invisible to most of his American audience, that they are seen as historical figures or stereotypes, not as present-day contributors to American society. So, when the author lists historical contributions, he's not just providing details, he's strategically countering the audience's likely assumption that Native Americans are relics of the past. This is what the rubric means by sophistication, explaining the rhetorical choices in light of the rhetorical situation, particularly the assumptions that the author thinks most of his audience hold. Now let's revise the first paragraph. The opening sentence. The contributions to America that have been made by Native Americans go beyond helping early British settlers and include fighting alongside other Americans in battles as recently as 2007. The problem with the opening sentence is that it's just summary. It doesn't really set up the analysis. Let's reframe it to show the author's purpose. The revised version, to counter the perception of Native Americans as historical figures disconnected from modern America. Truer provides concrete historical details spanning from the Revolutionary War to present-day service in Iraq. Notice I'm not just saying what Truer does, I'm explaining why, to counter a specific misconception. Here's the original commentary, and here's the revised version. With these historical details, Truer challenges the audience's likely view of Native Americans as separate from real American history. The inclusion of contemporary examples, soldiers serving 22 months of battle duty in Iraq, further surprises and enlightens the audience who do not think of Native Americans as active American citizens. The historical details would help the audience understand that Native Americans do not live in a distant past, but are central to American life. Instead of saying the audience, specify the audience as those who likely view Native Americans as separate from real American history, or those who do not think of Native Americans as active American citizens. Instead of saying Native Americans are important to America, present the tension in the text with a but sentence. Native Americans do not live in a distant past, but are central to American life. If you want to reveal what tension is, you can click the link in the top right corner. Now let's look at the second body paragraph. For a quick correction, the student calls this a novel, but it's a non-fiction. This confusion is common because many AP Lang teachers assign novels in AP Lang courses, which honestly bewilders me. AP Lang tests students' ability to read non-fiction. If teachers want to teach students how to analyze fiction, they can do that in AP Literature. Many high school English teachers were English Lit majors in college, so they gravitate toward teaching fiction. That's why so many students are struggling with rhetorical analysis. They're just not getting enough practice with nonfiction. But the bigger problem here is what I call the fixed idea trap. The student writes, by utilizing second-person language such as you or us, the author effectively brings the reader into their words and connects them with the meaning of the essay. This use of direct address of the reader will ultimately drive home his message. Yes, sometimes second person creates connection and inclusion. For example, Condoleezza Rice says in her commencement speech, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I know how it feels to hold inspirations when half of your neighbors think you're incapable or uninterested in anything higher. And I know there are some in this audience who have perhaps faced the same. So she's saying, you and I, we are the same. I've been through what you've been through. But here's the key. One rhetorical choice can create many different effects. Rhetorical analysis is challenging because you need to explain what specific effect the choice creates in a specific text. Think of it like cooking with eggs. You can scramble eggs for breakfast, whip egg whites into a marine for dessert, or use eggs as a binder in meatballs. Same ingredient, completely different functions, depending on what you're making. Similarly, rhetorical choices are versatile. Your job is to explain the specific effect in the passage you're analyzing, not impose a fixed function you memorized. The passage opens with, if you're driving and since this is America is most likely the case, the sign is soon behind you and soon forgotten. Truer is describing how most Americans drive past reservation signs without thinking about them. The you here implicates the audience in this erasure. So this isn't about inclusion in the abstract sense. Truer isn't saying you and I, we are the same. He's making the audience confront their own complicity in ignoring Native Americans. Whereas Rice used second person to express empathy and set herself up as a role model, Truer uses it to make his audience uncomfortable. This is what's holding essays back from scoring or 4 points on evidence and commentary. Students apply memorized functions to rhetorical choices without analyzing their specific effect in context. So here's a revised version that scores all 4 points. Truer takes care to engage his audience through direct address, but not in the way readers might expect. When he writes, if you're driving, this sign is soon behind you and soon forgotten, the second person you doesn't create inclusion, it creates implication. Instead of positioning the Native Americans as a distant them, Truer makes his audience participants in the erasure he's describing. The choice of you can see these kinds of signs all over America rather than the signs can be seen from all over America is significant. It emphasizes that reservations are everywhere and the audience has access to connecting with Native Americans across the country, yet they choose not to. This seemingly insignificant shift from passive to active voice places responsibility directly on readers, creating subtle pressure for them to recognize their role in the problem and potentially become part of the solution. By using direct address not to build connection, but to highlight this connection, Truer makes the audience ignorance more difficult to deny or rationalize. Notice how I constantly present the tension of the passage by using not instead of, rather than, yet, not to, but to, and how I explain the purpose of the tension to earn the sophistication point. Now, let's look at the third body paragraph. This is actually the student's strongest work, particularly this sentence. By referring to Native Americans and their reservations as being us American, us apple pie, he is working against the narrative of what is considered American and highlighting how these vital communities have worked to shape our nation. So the student identifies the central tension in the passage, that the author wants to work against the narrative which underplays and discounts Native Americans. However, the analysis still missing something crucial. Look closely at Truer's actual text. Indian reservations and those of us who live on them are as American as apple pie, baseball, and muscle cars. Unlike American pie, however, Indians contributed to the birth of America itself. See that pivot? Unlike American pie, however, Truer isn't just comparing apple pie with Native Americans. He's contrasting. And the emphasis is on the contrast, not the comparison. Here's what the student missed. Truer is saying that Native Americans aren't just as American as apple pie. They are more fundamentally American because unlike apple pie, which is just a dessert, Native Americans actually contributed to America's founding. Apple pie didn't feed troops. Apple pie didn't inspire the Constitution. Apple pie did not fight in Iraq. Native Americans did all of these things. So when Truer opens with "as American as apple pie," he's meeting his audience where they are using a phrase they recognize. But he immediately undercuts the similarity. Truer concedes that Native American can be seen alongside these symbols of Americanness, but then argues that they are fundamentally different because their contributions are real and historical, not symbolic. However, by analyzing the apple pie phrase in isolation, the student misses the strategic contrast that follows and thus lose points for evidence and commentary and for sophistication. Here's the revised paragraph. Truer strategically invokes and then subverts a familiar phrase to reframe Native American identity. When he asserts that American reservations and those of us who live on them are as American as apple pie, baseball, and muscle cars, he initially seemed to be claiming equal status among the American symbols. However, the immediate pivot. Unlike apple pie, however, Indians contributed to the birth of America itself, reveals his actual strategy. Truer isn't arguing that Native Americans deserve a place alongside these cultural icons. He's arguing that they are more foundational than them. By setting up this comparison only to emphasize the contrast, Truer dismantles his audience likely framework that American means apple pie and baseball and replaces it with evidence that makes them realize how much more substantial and enduring Native American contributions have been. Actually, to score sophistication, I added a few more sentences. As the introduction to a book titled Rest Life, this argument does more than correct misconceptions. It reframes what understanding America actually requires. By demonstrating that Native American contributions are more foundational than the cultural icons typically used to define Americanness, Truer positions his life not as a niche interest for those curious about Native Americans, but as an essential reading for anyone seeking to understand America itself. If you can't understand America without understanding apple pie and baseball, you certainly can't understand it without understanding the people who fed the Revolutionary Army and inspired the Constitution. I explain how this passage, being the introduction of a book, helps the audience achieve his ultimate goal of persuading his audience to read the entire book. So I take into account the context and also the purpose, which are two of the 6 elements of the rhetorical situation. Increasingly, College Board selects the preface or the introduction of a book for the rhetorical analysis prompt. So you need to keep in mind that the introduction of a book ultimately serves to persuade the audience to read the entire book. All right, let me summarize 3 key points to get unstuck at a 130. Key point number 1, to improve your commentary, specify the audience and present the tension. Don't just say the audience who drive past by reservations without being curious, or the audience who assume Native Americans only play a negligible role in American history. Don't just say by using second person, the author argues that Native Americans are important. Say, the second person pronoun emphasizes that reservations are everywhere, that the audience has access to connecting with Native Americans across the country, yet they choose not to. Try to write sentences that include but, rather than, instead of, or not, to present what the author is arguing against. Key point number 2, avoid the fixed idea trap. Don't just memorize that the second person creates connection or repetition makes the sentence more rhythmic and more memorable. Every rhetorical choice is versatile. You need to analyze what that rhetorical choice in this specific passage for this specific audience. Formulaic phrases are red flags. When you catch yourself writing allows readers to understand or help convey the message, you're probably not analyzing deeply enough. Rhetorical analysis is about understanding what the author is really trying to achieve. What misconception does the author want to dispel? In what ways does the author want the audience to change their mind? Key point number 3, keep in mind the rhetorical situation. Explain why it matters that this is a book introduction or a commencement speech or a eulogy. The genre of the text is also part of the rhetorical situation. That is how you get unstuck at a 130 for rhetorical analysis. If you need more help with rhetorical analysis, you can watch my other videos where I talk about how to annotate, how to earn the sophistication point, and how to speed up your writing. I also have an MCQ series where I talk about the essential knowledge and help you find the right answers the most efficient way possible. And if you're struggling with essays and want personalized feedback, I offer essay review services. Check the description for more details. Thanks for watching. See you next class.